Greetings and welcome to this episode of Romeo and Shakespeare. Oh, angels and ministers of grace defend us. My lord, you look as if you've just seen a ghost. Oh, yeah, twice. Please, just give me 2 minutes. You know I want to help you, and I'm sure that a way to expose your uncle's villainy can be found, but not by sitting home all alone in the castle. I urge you to take Horatio into your confidence, and if you can't come around fair Ophelia anymore because you mistakenly slew her foolish father Polonius, at least please consider what you said to the queen, your mother. You don't need to be cruel in order to be kind. And if I made you mad for something I might have said about her feelings or your behavior, I apologize. But please, let's forget my past comments, because even if the future doesn't look bright ahead, Ophelia deserves better treatment from you. I've heard you say that you don't want no other love than her. Well, if you don't want her to stop thinking of thee when you go to England, it's better that she knows that you're only pretending to be mad. It's terribly unkind of you to cause her so much sadness, so don't make her feel this way. Look, no matter what you decide to do about Claudius and your mother, I urge you to come over here and listen to me first, because I think you know what I want you to say to Ophelia, so stop procrastinating already. If it be not now, yet it will come. The readiness is all. My lord, you've got to tell her plainly, Ophelia, baby, it's just you I'm thinking of. So whether your happiness with her is going to be or not to be, that is the question for another day. But for now, I prithee, my lord, don't be cruel to a heart that's true. Thank you very much. Near the beginning of the 1986 film Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, Dr. McCoy is worried about having Mr. Spock resume his normal duties as the science officer aboard the Enterprise after having died, been regenerated, and having his memory reinfused. Out of frustration, McCoy cries, "Angels and ministers of grace defend us," to which Spock simply replies, Hamlet Act 1, Scene 4. So apparently, knowing your Shakespeare in the 23rd century is the sure sign of competency. So let's take a look at the plot. The play opens during a cold night on the ramparts of the Danish royal castle Elsinore, with guards Bernardo and Marcellus telling Prince Hamlet's friend Horatio that they've seen a ghost who resembles the late King Hamlet. They want the unbelieving Horatio there to be a witness. After the ghost appears again, they decide to tell the dead king's son, Prince Hamlet of Denmark, what they've seen. The prince is mourning the loss of his recently deceased father, King Hamlet. Meanwhile, his uncle and his father's brother, King Claudius, has hastily married King Hamlet's widow, Gertrude, who is also Hamlet's mother, and claimed the throne for himself. Denmark has been in a long-standing feud with neighboring Norway, in which King Hamlet slew King Fortinbras of Norway in battle. Even though Denmark defeated Norway and the Norwegian throne fell to King Fortinbras's infirm brother, Denmark is still concerned about a potential invasion led by the dead Norwegian king's son, Prince Fortinbras. King Claudius and Queen Gertrude discuss affairs of state with their elderly advisor Polonius. Claudius allows for Polonius' son Laertes to return to school in France, and he sends envoys to inform the King of Norway about his nephew Fortinbras. Claudius also questions Hamlet, who is still grieving for his father, and urges him not to return to the University of Wittenberg. After the court exits, Hamlet despairs of his father's death and his mother's hasty remarriage. Learning of the ghost from Horatio, Hamlet resolves to see it himself. As Polonius' son Laertes prepares to depart for France, Polonius offers him advice that culminates in the maxim, "To thine own self be true." Polonius's daughter Ophelia loves Hamlet, but Laertes warns him against seeking the prince's attention, and Polonius orders her to reject his advances. That night on the watch, the ghost appears to Hamlet, tells the prince that Claudius murdered him by pouring poison into his ear as he slept, and urges Hamlet to avenge his murder. Hamlet agrees, and the ghost vanishes. Afterwards, the prince confides to Horatio and the sentries that he may pretend that he's going mad. Hamlet forces them to swear never to speak of this, and they swear. However, he remains uncertain of the ghost's reliability, and Hamlet hesitates to take action against Claudius until he's more certain. In Act 2, Ophelia tells her father that the night before, Hamlet was behaving erratically. Polonius blames Hamlet's love of his daughter for the madness and resolves to tell Claudius and Gertrude about it. The king and queen are welcoming Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, two of Hamlet's friends from the university, to Elsinore. The royal couple asks them to learn the cause of Hamlet's melancholy behavior. Meanwhile, messengers return and say that the King of Norway has rebuked Prince Fortinbras for attempting to refight his father's battles, and that Fortinbras will not march against Denmark, but will pursue Poland instead, even though they request permission to pass through Danish territory in order to get there. Polonius tells the king and queen that he suspects the cause of Hamlet's behavior is Ophelia. When Polonius speaks to Hamlet in order to try to learn more, Hamlet pretends to be mad, continually mocking and insulting Polonius. When Rosencrantz and Guildenstern arrive, Hamlet greets his so-called friends warmly, but quickly realizes that they are there to spy on him for Claudius. Hamlet admits that he is upset, but refuses to tell them the true reason. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern tell Hamlet that they have brought along a troupe of actors whom they met while traveling to Elsinore. After welcoming the actors and dismissing his friends turned spies, Hamlet asks them to stage a play featuring a death in the style of his father's murder. Hamlet intends to study Claudius's reaction to the play and determine if the ghost was telling the truth about Claudius's guilt. In Act 3, Polonius forces Ophelia to return Hamlet's love letters, while he and Claudius secretly watch in order to see Hamlet's reaction. While Hamlet is alone and depressed, he muses and delivers his to be or not to be speech. When Ophelia enters and tries to return Hamlet's things, he accuses her of immodesty, crying, "Get thee to a nunnery." Shortly after that, the court gathers to watch the play Hamlet requested, but seeing the player king murdered when his rival pours poison into his ear, Claudius abruptly rises and runs from the room, and Hamlet takes this as proof of his uncle's guilt. Gertrude has Hamlet summoned to her bedchamber to rebuke him for his bad behavior. Meanwhile, Claudius talks to himself about the impossibility of repenting, since he's still in possession of his ill-gotten gains, namely his brother's wife and the crown. While he's praying, Hamlet, on his way to visit his mother, sees Claudius on his knees and sneaks up behind him, but does not kill him, because he thinks that killing Claudius while he's praying will send him straight to heaven, while his father's ghost is stuck in purgatory. I'll explain later why this would never happen. When Hamlet enters the queen's bedchamber, they immediately begin to fight, and Gertrude cries out for help. Polonius, who is spying on the conversation from behind an arras, which is a curtain, also calls for help. Hamlet, believing it's the king, stabs Polonius wildly, killing him. Hamlet pulls aside the arras and sees what he's done. In a rage, he brutally insults his mother for her apparent ignorance of Claudius's villainy, but his father's ghost reappears and rebukes him for his inaction and harsh words. Unable to see or hear the ghost herself, Gertrude takes Hamlet's conversation with it as further evidence of madness. After begging the queen to stop sleeping with Claudius, Hamlet drags Polonius's corpse away and leaves. In Act 4, Hamlet pretends to act mad and hesitates before telling Claudius where he's hidden Polonius's body. The king has Rosencrantz and Guildenstern accompany Hamlet to England, along with a sealed letter to the English king requesting that Hamlet be executed immediately. Consumed by grief at Polonius's death, the now mad Ophelia roams Elsinore. Laertes returns from France and is enraged by his father's death and his sister's madness. Claudius convinces Laertes that Hamlet is solely responsible for both. Meanwhile, a letter arrives stating that Hamlet has returned to Denmark, thus foiling Claudius's plot. Claudius proposes a fencing match between Laertes and Hamlet. Laertes says that he will put poison on the tip of his foil, but in case that fails, Claudius will also poison Hamlet's wine goblet. Meanwhile, Gertrude interrupts them to report that Ophelia has drowned, but it's unclear whether her death was a suicide or an accident caused by her madness. In Act 5, Horatio receives a letter from Hamlet explaining how he escaped by negotiating with pirates who attempted to attack his English-bound ship. Two gravediggers discuss Ophelia's apparent suicide while digging her grave. Hamlet arrives with Horatio and banters with one of the gravediggers, who unearths the skull of a jester from Hamlet's childhood named Yorick. Hamlet picks up the skull, saying, "Alas, poor Yorick," as he contemplates mortality. Ophelia's funeral procession approaches, led by Laertes. Hamlet and Horatio initially hide, but when Hamlet realizes that Ophelia is the one being buried, he reveals himself, proclaiming his love for her. Laertes and Hamlet fight by Ophelia's graveside, but the brawl is broken up. Later, at Elsinore, Hamlet explains to Horatio how he discovered Claudius's letter among Rosencrantz and Guildenstern's belongings and replaced it with a forged copy directing that his former friends should be killed instead. Meanwhile, a foolish courtier named Osric interrupts the conversation and brings news of the fencing challenge to Hamlet. Despite Horatio's pleas, Hamlet accepts. He does well at first, leading the match by 2 hits to none, but Gertrude unknowingly raises a toast to him with the poisoned glass of wine that Claudius had set aside for Hamlet. Claudius tries to stop her from drinking, but he's too late. Laertes realizes the plot will be revealed and slashes Hamlet with a poisoned foil. In the ensuing scuffle, they switch swords and Hamlet wounds Laertes with his own poisoned weapon. Gertrude collapses, saying she is poisoned, and dies. In his dying moments, Laertes reconciles with Hamlet and reveals Claudius's plot. Hamlet then kills Claudius. As the poison takes effect, Hamlet, hearing that Fortinbras is marching through the area, names the Norwegian prince as his successor. Distraught at the thought of being the last survivor, Horatio says that he will commit suicide by drinking the dregs of Gertrude's poisoned wine, but Hamlet begs him to live on and tell his story. Hamlet dies in Horatio's arms, uttering, "The rest is silence." Fortinbras, who was supposedly marching on Poland, arrives with his army at the palace. At the same time, the English ambassador brings news that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. Horatio promises to share the full story of what has happened. The play ends with Fortinbras, after seeing the entire Danish royal family dead, taking the crown for himself and ordering a military funeral to honor Hamlet. When we return, we'll look at some of these remarkable characters in Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. All right, now let's take a look at some of the major characters in the play. Hamlet is a prince and the son of the late King Hamlet of Denmark. Although he should be next in line to the throne, his uncle Claudius leaps ahead of him, but swears that Hamlet will be the next in line. Hamlet is also in love with Ophelia, the daughter of the foolish old Lord Polonius, who warns his daughter about getting too serious about Hamlet, knowing that his responsibilities to the state may outweigh his desire to marry for love. Laertes is Polonius's son and Ophelia's brother. He dotes on her and also warns her to beware of Hamlet. Gertrude is Hamlet's mother, who hastily remarried after her husband's death to Claudius, her former brother-in-law, who, as we learn, actually poisoned her husband, his brother, while he slept. But unlike Polonius and Laertes, Gertrude seems to have no objections to Hamlet marrying Ophelia and indicates that several times. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are two of Hamlet's friends and students from the University of Wittenberg. They are virtually two-dimensional characters who are interchangeable. We never learn their first names, and neither one is in any scene without the other one being present. Ironically, the Queen thinks they're Hamlet's closest friends, and yet he can barely even tell them apart. Horatio is a fellow student and close friend of Hamlet's. Unlike Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, Horatio is a true friend in whom Hamlet continuously confides his deepest fears and secrets. His friendship is genuine, and out of love for Hamlet, he reluctantly agrees to live on at the end to tell Hamlet's story. Along with Polonius, Shakespeare includes Osric, a foolish courtier, and two clowns who serve as grave diggers at Ophelia's gravesite to offer some morbid but comic relief. Listen to this exchange between Hamlet and the first gravedigger in Act 5, Scene 1, when Hamlet asks the gravedigger, who doesn't know it's him, why Hamlet was sent to England. He said, "Why, because he was mad. He shall recover his wits there, or if he do not, it's no great matter there." Hamlet asks why. He says, "'Twill not be seen in him there. There the men are as mad as he." I imagine that both the men and the women in the English audience found this exchange amusing. And before we move on, I want to spend a little more time focusing on Polonius. It's understood that he's a fool. In fact, even though he says that brevity is the soul of wit, he only does so after a long, convoluted prologue to Gertrude and Claudius. Still, Hamlet gives him some of the best lines in the play when he's giving advice to his son Laertes, who's going back to France. This is in Act 1, Scene 4. Polonius says, "And these few precepts in thy memory look thou character. Give thy thoughts no tongue, nor any unproportioned thought his act. Be thou familiar, but by no means vulgar. Those friends thou hast, and their adoption tried, grapple them unto thy soul with hoops of steel, but do not dull thy palm with entertainment of each new-hatched unfledged comrade. Beware of entrance to a quarrel, but being in, bear it that the opposed may beware of thee. Give every man thy ear, but few thy voice. Take each man's censure, but reserve thy judgment. Costly thy habit, as thy purse can buy, but not expressed in fancy. Rich, not gaudy. For the apparel oft proclaims the man, and they in France of the best rank and station are of a most select and generous chief in that. Neither a borrower nor a lender be, for loan oft loses both itself and friend, and borrowing dulls the edge of husbandry. This above all, to thine own self be true, and it must follow as the night the day, thou canst not then be false to any man." Shakespeare often provides his best advice and counsel from fools, jesters, and clowns, but you have to admit that for a doddering old fool, even if the precepts are common sense, they really do provide good advice for a father to give to a young man coming of age and going to a foreign country. When we get back, we'll look at some of the plot devices and memorable scenes from Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. Virtually all theater critics agree that Hamlet is a masterpiece. So what makes it so? Well, perhaps the answer lies in the plot devices. We'll start with the soliloquies. These are long speeches by one character, usually alone on stage, who reveals his or her inner thoughts, fears, and plans to the audience. But it's not just that we have this exposure that makes the play so magnificent. The answer lies more thoroughly in the language. Whether in a soliloquy or in the dialogue, Shakespeare's words in this play have transcended time and have become an enormous part of our vernacular. People quote lines from Hamlet frequently without even knowing that they're doing so. Next, we have a ghost. Shakespeare's audiences were familiar with the idea of ghosts, and they still hold a special fascination for us today because when we see them on stage, they don't always look like the way we imagine them in our minds, and besides, ghosts aren't bound by the same limitations as we mere mortals are. Shakespeare also used ghosts in Richard III and Julius Caesar. There's also the play within the play, also known as a dumb show. In Hamlet, Shakespeare cleverly inserts his acting troupe performing the mousetrap in order to catch the conscience of the king, Claudius, when he sees a similar murder to the one he committed on King Hamlet. Shakespeare also included plays within a play in Love's Labour's Lost and A Midsummer Night's Dream. And of course, the entire story of The Taming of the Shrew is enacted as a story within another story. Shakespeare included the incestuous marriage between Queen Gertrude and her late husband's brother Claudius. We've also seen this in Pericles, Prince of Tyre, with King Antiochus and his daughter, and in Henry VIII, who married his dead wife's brother, Catherine of Aragon, and then uses this as his reason for divorcing her when he wanted to marry Anne Boleyn. Hamlet also deals with the topic of madness, whether real or feigned. Hamlet pretends to be mad through much of the play in order to be able to get away with some bad behavior. We also see Edgar in King Lear pretending to be mad for self-preservation, and Titus Andronicus does the same thing in order to avenge his children. Now, Ophelia actually does go mad after the death of her father Polonius. We see this happen to Lady Macbeth in Macbeth, and also Cardinal Beaufort in Henry VI, Part 2, after each of them plot murders. Just as licensed or allowed fools were permitted to have great latitude on what they said, so too were people who were mad. We also see this in The Two Noble Kinsmen, when the jailer's daughter, who is also mad, is welcomed into a performing company. She also sings some of the same nonsense lyrics as Ophelia. And let's not forget the head trick, in which Hamlet writes a replacement letter instructing England to cut off the heads of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, specifically stating that they should not even be given time to repent their sins, in place of Claudius's letter instructing the death of Hamlet. There are also some magnificent scenes that really make this play spectacular. Beginning in Act 1, Scene 3, in which Polonius gives his son Laertes some advice, including, "To thine own self be true." In Act 1, Scene 5, Hamlet comes face to face with his father's ghost and learns the truth about his murder. This is an incredibly frightening scene, first because he sees the ghost, second because the ghost identifies himself as his father's spirit, third because he learns that his father was murdered by his uncle, and fourth because the ghost tells him to revenge his murder. I'd say that was a lot to put on anybody's plate. Act 3, Scene 1 not only contains Hamlet delivering his to-be or not-to-be soliloquy, but also shows him manhandling Ophelia in his Get Thee to a Nunnery speech. And by all means, be sure to check out the Kenneth Branagh version of this play, because the magnificent Kate Winslet delivers her best acting work when her face is pressed against the two-way mirrors in the palace, and you can see the look of shock, terror, sadness, and love on her face as this is happening. It is not to be missed. Act 3, Scene 2 allows us to watch the play within the play and see Claudius's reaction when he realizes that the actors are carrying out a similar murder plot to the one he committed on his brother. In Act 3, Scene 4, we see Polonius slain behind the arras in Gertrude's bedchamber when Hamlet mistakes him for the king. This is also where Hamlet has a heart-to-heart talk with his mother, explains his own behavior, and urges her to have no more to do with Claudius. Act 5, Scene 1 provides some much-needed comic relief to this heavily somber play when Hamlet interacts with the first gravedigger, who is very witty, but frequently uses the wrong words, such as argle instead of ergo. Also, this scene is very memorable when both Laertes and Hamlet wind up grappling at Ophelia's gravesite, completely destroying the reverence of the occasion. And naturally, Act 5, Scene 2 includes the climax of the fighting scenes in which Hamlet and Laertes both die, not to mention Gertrude and Claudius. We also see young Fortinbras arrive late to the party, only to learn that he can now claim Denmark as his kingdom by default. Next up, we're going to delve into some of the most powerful lines that run through Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. Virtually every serious actor wants to have Hamlet on their resume. That's because it's one of the most demanding roles in all of theater. Think about it. You have to be a philosopher, a student, a friend, a theater critic, a lover, a prince, a swordsman, a son, a nephew, and a poet. In addition, you must stretch yourself to act annoying, flippant, rude, obnoxious, outrageous, humble, suicidal, terrified, heartbroken, enraged, provoking, depressed, clever, aggravating, melancholy, insane, and grateful. In one role, you can demonstrate the true quality of your ability to express yourself in all different situations. No doubt that's why actors including Sarah Bernhardt, John Barrymore, Sir Laurence Olivier, Sir John Gielgud, Richard Burton, Peter O'Toole, Richard Chamberlain, Christopher Plummer, Derek Jacobi, Ethan Hawke, Kevin Kline, David Tennant, Daniel Day-Lewis, Christopher Walken, Keanu Reeves, Jude Law, Mel Gibson, Kenneth Branagh, and Tom Hiddleston have all taken on the role of Hamlet in their careers. It would be virtually impossible to discuss Hamlet without touching on the theme of revenge because it drives so much of the action in the play. First, we have King Hamlet's ghost, who wants Hamlet to revenge his death at the hands of Claudius. This is very problematic because, no matter how you slice it, Hamlet will be damned for killing his uncle. Next, we have Hamlet, who wants revenge on Claudius for his father's murder. In addition, Hamlet also ensures the deaths of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, his false friends from school. Laertes wants revenge for his father's death, Polonius. First he goes after Claudius, and then he turns his fury towards Hamlet. And finally we have young Fortinbras, a third son who wants revenge on his father's death. But since King Hamlet is already dead, he'll just take Denmark instead. Well, at least somebody won't be going to hell for revenging a murder. But let's look now at Act 2, Scene 2, when we hear how Hamlet plans to expose Claudius and seek revenge for his father's murder. This is right after he heard the Player King give an emotional and moving performance. Now I am alone. Oh, what a rogue and peasant slave am I! Is it not monstrous that this player here, but in a fiction, in a dream of passion, could force his soul so to his own conceit, that from her working all his visage wand, tears in his eyes, distraction in his aspect, a broken voice, and his whole function suiting with forms to his conceit? And all for nothing, for Hecuba. What's Hecuba to him, or he to Hecuba, that he should weep for her? What would he do had he the motive and the cue for passion that I have? He would drown the stage with tears and cleave the general ear with horrid speech, make mad the guilty, and appall the free, confound the ignorant, and amaze, indeed, the very faculties of eyes and ears. Then he continues, I have heard that guilty creatures sitting at a play have, by the very cunning of the scene, been struck so to the soul that presently they have proclaimed their malefactions. For murder, though it hath no tongue, will speak with most miraculous organ. I'll have these players play something like the murder of my father before mine uncle. I'll observe his looks. I'll tent him to the quick. If he do blench, I know my course. The spirit that I have seen may be the devil, and the devil hath power to assume a pleasing shape. Yea, and perhaps, out of my weakness and my melancholy, as he is very potent with such spirits, abuses me to damn me. I'll have more grounds, more relative than this. The play's the thing wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king. We see by this that Hamlet is not mad, but he's using his cunning to create a strategy in order to learn the truth about his father's murder. There's also the theme of vulnerability running through the play, which we see in a number of different characters. First, Hamlet cries, "Frailty, thy name is woman," when describing his mother who married her brother-in-law just 1 month after her husband's death. But let's have a little bit of compassion for Gertrude. She is also a ruling power in Denmark. Her mate is gone. She's vulnerable because of her grief, and her concerns that Denmark is now in a very precarious situation, especially with Fortinbras threatening to attack, are real. It would be only natural for Gertrude to turn to Claudius during her time of grief, since he also lost a brother. They were probably close in age. She didn't have any reason to suspect him at the time, and she definitely needed someone else to share the throne in order to protect Denmark. We also see how vulnerable Ophelia is because her emotions are all over the place. She loves Hamlet, but her father and brother urge her not to pursue a relationship with him because, as the heir apparent, he may not freely choose his spouse. We know this from Henry V and Henry VI, who both chose their wives specifically to strengthen ties with France. Ironically, though, Gertrude, the queen and Hamlet's mother, seems to look forward to Hamlet marrying Ophelia for love. We can then take from this that Gertrude also married King Hamlet for love and responded to Claudius's affections sincerely as well. And let's not overlook Laertes, who, being vulnerable after being poisoned, comes clean and confesses his sins and asks Hamlet for forgiveness. Of course, Hamlet demonstrates a vulnerability throughout the entire play because of what's been put upon him. We see this in Act 5, Scene 2, when Hamlet is alone with his truest friend, Horatio, and reveals that he no longer fears death. There's a special providence in the fall of a sparrow. If it be now, 'tis not to come. If it be not to come, it will be now. If it be not now, yet it will come. The readiness is all. Since no man of aught he leaves knows, what is it to leave betimes? Let be. In other words, God knows even when a bird is to die. It doesn't matter when we die, as long as we are prepared for it. By the way, this is a biblical reference to St. Matthew chapter 10, verses 29 to 31, in which he says, "Are not 2 sparrows sold for a farthing? And not one of them shall fall on the ground without your Father. But the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Fear not, therefore. Better are you than many sparrows." Hamlet is also very much a play about confidences and deceptions. Hamlet takes very few people into his confidence. There's his best friend Horatio, in whom he confides the most. There's the soldiers of the watch, Bernardo and Marcellus, with whom he begs their silence. There's also the players to whom he must instruct on how to perform his altered version of the mousetrap. And finally, he takes his mother Gertrude into his confidence in her bedchamber after slaying Polonius. Hamlet also pretends to take Claudius into his confidence when he asks where Polonius' body is. Now, this is Act 4, Scene 3, and by this point, we're at the point of no return, since Hamlet has already killed Polonius. Thus, he has no qualms about insulting and infuriating Claudius. When Claudius says, "Where is Polonius?" he says, "In heaven. Send hither to see. If your messenger find him not there, seek him in the other place yourself. But indeed, if you find him not within this month, you shall nose him as you go up the stairs into the lobby." This is Hamlet's subtle way of telling the king where to go. Claudius also takes people into his confidence, such as Polonius, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, Gertrude, and Laertes. He is the king, after all, But he's not a good king, and just like in The Godfather, he keeps his friends close and his enemies closer. As for the deceptions, there are many of them. Claudius deceives Gertrude in order to marry her and get the crown. He also sends Hamlet to England to secretly have him beheaded. Laertes deceives Hamlet by poisoning the blade of his sword in order to kill him during their dueling contest. Polonius spies on Hamlet in his mother's closet and tells Rinaldo to follow his son to France and spread rumors about him in order to find out if they can be substantiated. Young Fortinbras deceives his uncle and says he's going to cross through Denmark only so that he could attack Poland. Hamlet urges Gertrude to deceive Claudius and make excuses not to sleep with him. Ophelia, being instructed by her father, deceives Hamlet when Polonius and Claudius want to spy on him. And finally, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern deceive Hamlet by trying to hide the fact that they were sent for by the king and queen. But he seems to catch on rather quickly and starts ranting to indicate to them that he is mad at least some of the time. This is Act 2, Scene 2. Hamlet says, "What a piece of work is a man! How noble in reason, how infinite in faculty, in form and moving, how express and admirable. In action, how like an angel, in apprehension, how like a god. The beauty of the world, the paragon of animals. And yet to me, what is this quintessence of dust? Man delights me not." By the way, the first time I ever heard that speech was by Patrick Stewart in the pilot for Star Trek The Next Generation, Encounter at Farpoint. Of course, Hamlet also deceives himself that he's going to act quickly and revenge his father's murder, but that doesn't happen. I guess we could say, procrastination, thy name is Hamlet. When we return, we'll look at some of Shakespeare's most powerful lines in the play. No discussion of Hamlet could be complete without including his most famous soliloquy. In Act 3, Scene 1, Hamlet delivers his most famous speech, indeed, the most famous soliloquy in the entire English language. To be or not to be? That is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and, by opposing, end them, to die, to sleep, no more, and by a sleep to say we end the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished. To die, to sleep, perhaps to dream. Aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil, must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. For who would bear the whips and scorns of time, the oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely, the pangs of despised love, the law's delay, the insolence of office, and the spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes, when he himself might his quietus make with a bare bodkin? Who would fardels bear, to grunt and sweat under a weary life, but that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveller returns, puzzles the will and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of. Thus, conscience does make cowards of us all, and thus the native hue of resolution is sicklied o'er with the pale cast of thought, and enterprises of great pitch and moment, with this regard, their currents turn awry and lose the name of action. Of course, if that weren't enough, the scene follows immediately with Hamlet violently mistreating Ophelia and urging her, saying, "Get thee to a nunnery, Why wouldst thou be a breeder of sinners? I am myself indifferent honest, but yet I could accuse me of such things that it were better my mother had not borne me. I am very proud, revengeful, ambitious, with more offences at my beck than I have thoughts to put them in, imaginations to give them shape, or time to act them in. What should such fellows as I do, crawling between heaven and earth? We are arrant knaves all. Believe none of us. Go thy ways to a nunnery. Where is your father? And Ophelia says, At home, my lord. He says, Let the doors be shut upon him, that he may play the fool nowhere but in his own house. Farewell. And she says, Oh, help him, you sweet heavens. And he comes back. If thou dost marry, I'll give thee this plague for thy dowry. Be thou as chaste as ice, as pure as snow, thou shalt not escape calumny. Get thee to a nunnery, go. Farewell. Or if thou wilt needs marry, marry a fool, for wise men know well enough what monsters you make of them. To a nunnery go, and quickly too. Farewell. And she says, Heavenly powers restore him. And once again he comes back. I have heard of your paintings too well enough. God has given you one face, and you make yourselves another. You jig and amble, and you lisp. You nickname God's creatures, and make your wantonness your ignorance. Go to, I'll no more on it. It hath made me mad. I say, we will have no more marriages. Those that are married already, all but one, meaning Claudius, shall live. The rest shall keep as they are. To a nunnery go. Now, Hamlet also contains more familiar lines than any other play. Here's some of my favorites, and you'll probably recognize most of them. In Act 1, Scene 2, when Claudius calls Hamlet his son, Hamlet replies, in his very first line in the play, a little more than kin and less than kind. Well, it took me about 16 viewings of this line being delivered to understand what it means. Kin, a relative, K-I-N, versus kind, K-I-N-D. Well, Claudius and Hamlet are certainly relatives, but they don't like each other. So a little more than kin, he accepts that, he's his father and his uncle, and less than kind, we are not going to get along. Act 1, Scene 4, Hamlet says, Angels and ministers of grace, defend us. Marcellus says, something is rotten in the state of Denmark. How often have we heard that one? Hamlet says, there are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. I love Gertrude's line, more matter with less art, when she's talking to Polonius. In other words, get to the point, or as my former business partner used to put it, don't build me a clock, just tell me the time. Polonius says, though this be madness, yet there is method in it. We usually paraphrase that. There's method to my madness. Polonius also says, my honorable lord, I will most humbly take my leave of you. And Hamlet replies, you cannot, sir, take from me anything that I will more willingly part withal, except my life. Except my life. Except my life. Hamlet also says, there is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. This is great advice for a pessimist. It's a reminder for us to reframe our negative fears into positive outcomes. In Act 2, Scene 2, when Polonius says he will use the actors according to their desert, Hamlet rebukes him, saying, God's bodikins, man, much better. Use every man after his desert, and who should scape whipping? This is very reminiscent of Portia's quality of mercy speech in Act 4, Scene 1 of The Merchant of Venice, when she says, consider this, that in the course of justice, none of us should see salvation. In Act 3, Scene 2, Gertrude says, the lady doth protest too much, methinks, We often hear that one paraphrased. In Act 3, Scene 4, Hamlet says, "Let it work, for 'tis the sport to have the engineer hoist with his own petard." What a great line. Although Ophelia is mad, in Act 4, Scene 5, she says, "We know what we are, but know not what we may be." That's pretty profound for someone who's half of their mind. Hamlet says in Act 5, Scene 1, "Alas, poor Yorick! I knew him, Horatio, a fellow of infinite jest, of most excellent fancy." If you ever see the iconic image of Hamlet contemplating the skull, you'll instantly recognize it from being a reference to this scene. Hamlet says, "Let Hercules himself do what he may, the cat will mew, and dog will have his day." In other words, if you're patient, your time will come. The first time I ever heard this line was on an episode of The Honeymooners when Ralph Cramden uttered it. Gertrude says, "Sweets to the sweet, farewell. I hope thou shouldst have been my Hamlet's wife. I thought thy bride bed to have decked, sweet maid, and not have strewed thy grave." It's interesting that even though both Polonius and Laertes cautioned Ophelia about how impossible it would have been for Hamlet to marry her, Hamlet's mother, the queen, had no objection. In Act 5, Scene 2, Hamlet says to Horatio, "There's a divinity that shapes our ends, rough hew them how we will." I love this line. It means that even when our plans don't work out, God can still make them work out for us. And finally, as Hamlet dies, Horatio says, "Now cracks a noble heart. Good night, sweet prince, and flights of angels sing thee to thy rest." It sounds very similar to the end of Antony and Cleopatra when Dercetus says, "I say, O Caesar, Antony is dead." And Caesar replies, "The breaking of so great a thing should make a greater crack." When we return, we'll look at some of the major turning points in Hamlet, Prince of Denmark, and some correlations to the other Shakespeare plays. Because this play is so long, nearly 4,000 lines, it follows that there would be many turning points in the play as well, but we're just going to look at a few. The first takes place in Act 1, Scene 5, when the ghost of Hamlet's father tells him that Claudius did indeed murder him. This sets all the motion in place for the rest of the play. Not only is it a scary message to learn, but it's even scarier to receive it from a ghost who looks like your father. No wonder Hamlet is questioning whether or not this is really his father's ghost or a demon trying to get him to damn his own soul. Next is Act 2, Scene 3, when Hamlet sees Claudius's reaction to the play, which resembles him killing his own brother. In hindsight, this would have been the perfect place to call out Claudius for killing his father and making him stand trial. That would have eliminated the need for the senseless bloodshed that follows afterwards. You would have to categorize Hamlet mistakenly slaying Polonius in Act 3, Scene 4, not only as a turning point, but truly as his point of no return. No matter what Hamlet does after this point, he is still a murderer and will have to answer for his actions. After all, it's one thing to act mad, it's another thing to take someone's life while doing so. In Act 4, Scene 4, Hamlet has another soliloquy after learning how committed Fortinbras's troops are to fight over a worthless patch of ground in Poland. This motivates him to take actions upon a matter much more important. "How all occasions do inform against me, and spur my dull revenge. What is a man if his chief good and market of his time be but to sleep and feed? A beast no more. Sure, he that made us with such large discourse, looking before and after, gave us not the capability and godlike reason to fuss in us unused. Now, whether it be bestial oblivion, or some craven scruple of thinking too precisely on the event, a thought which quartered hath but one part wisdom, and ever 3 parts coward, I do not know why yet I live to say, This thing's to do, sith I have cause and will and strength and means to do it. Examples gross as earth exhort me. Witness this army of such mass in charge, led by a delicate and tender prince, whose spirit with divine ambition puffed, makes mouths at the invisible event, exposing what is mortal and unsure to all that fortune, death, and danger dare, even for an eggshell. Rightly, to be great is not to stir without great argument, but greatly to find quarrel in a straw when honor is at the stake. How stand I then, that have a father killed, a mother stained, excitements of my reason and my blood, and let all sleep, while to my shame I see the imminent death of 20,000 men, that for a fantasy and a trick of fame go to their graves like beds, fight for a plot whereon the numbers cannot try the cause, which is not tomb enough and continent to hide the slain. Oh, from this time forth my thoughts be bloody, or nothing worth. If ever someone was going to give themselves a motivating pep talk to take action, you would think this would be it. But as we'll see, Hamlet still has a way to go before he finally decides to do something to avenge his father's murder. We also learn in Act 4, Scene 6, that Hamlet tells Horatio in a letter that his ship was attacked by pirates on his way to England, and that he alone boarded the pirate ship after learning that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern were carrying letters to England for Hamlet's execution. Realizing that they had the Prince of Denmark aboard their ship, the pirates treated him as thieves of mercy, knowing that he could be beneficial to them. This is also similar to the pirates in Pericles, Prince of Tyre, who don't ravish Marina, but rescue her from the hands of the assassin Leonine, realizing she would be much more valuable to them if they sold her into prostitution in Mytilene. Also, the pirates in Henry VI Part 2 allow their prisoners who can afford to do so to escape death by requesting ransom payments. And finally, when we see Gertrude drink out of the poisoned chalice in Act 5, Scene 2, we know that this is the point of no return for Claudius. Even if he kills Hamlet, he still lost his queen, and for that, he seems truly remorseful. Of course, this leads to the sequential deaths of Laertes, Claudius, and Hamlet in quick succession, practically overshadowing the successful invasion of young Fortinbras, who will soon become the new king of Denmark anyway. There are also some additional correlations to other Shakespeare plays, including reflection, self-examination, and introspection. These we see in the magnificent soliloquies that allow us to better understand these characters. Shakespeare also used this method heavily in Henry IV Parts 1 and 2, Henry V, Richard III, and Henry VI Part 3, not to mention Macbeth, Romeo and Juliet, King Lear, Julius Caesar, and Coriolanus. Old Fortinbras was slain by King Hamlet in one-on-one combat, a challenge Mark Antony made of Octavius Caesar in Antony and Cleopatra, and Hal made of Harry Percy Hotspur in Henry IV Part 1. Young Fortinbras arrives at the end of the play to find a bunch of dead bodies, just like Octavius Caesar in Antony and Cleopatra and Prince Aeschylus in Romeo and Juliet. We also see the death ceremony in which Hamlet's body is carried out. This also happens at the end of Antony and Cleopatra and Romeo and Juliet, although we only hear about the ceremonies in those two plays. And finally, Horatio lives on to tell Hamlet's story, much as Friar Lawrence does in telling the story of Romeo and Juliet. When we return, we'll look at some interesting facts about Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. In preparing to do this episode, I did some research and I came across some interesting facts. The story of Hamlet was first written down in the year 1200 by Saxo the grammarian. Thus, it was already 400 years old when Shakespeare wrote it in 1600. Fortinbras wants to march his Norwegian troops through Denmark to get to Poland. But Denmark is not on the way to Poland. By land, the troops would have to go through Sweden, then Denmark, and then Germany in order to get to Poland. However, they could have sailed directly from Norway to Poland through the North Sea and the Baltic Sea much faster. I realize that Norway did not have any Norwegian cruise ships at the time, but they certainly had Viking ships. You would think this would have raised some red flags from Claudius before he said it was okay. This just proves that the qualities that make for a good leader in peacetime are not the same qualities that make you a good leader in times of war. By the way, Fortinbras means strong arm. Shakespeare is very specific about the flowers Ophelia continues to mention, which are laden with symbolism. For example, fennel and columbine were symbols of adultery and insincerity. Rue symbolized repentance. The daisy, unhappy love, and violets, faithfulness. By the way, Perdita also gives out herbs and flowers of significant meanings in The Winter's Tale. Shakespeare's only son was named Hamlet. He died in 1596 at age 11, about 4 years before Shakespeare wrote his play Hamlet. There is an acting tradition known as the Red Book, which is a red-bound copy of Hamlet once held by the legendary stage actor Johnston Forbes Robertson beginning around 1897. It has been passed down from one actor to another, to that actor dubbed to be the greatest Hamlet of their generation. It's gone from Michael Redgrave to Peter O'Toole to Derek Jacobi to Kenneth Branagh and currently to Tom Hiddleston in 2017. Some of the most famous phrases in the play have taken on a life of their own. For example, George Pollock's 1964 Miss Marple murder mystery is called Murder Most Foul. Tom Stoppard wrote a famous play in 1966 entitled Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. In 1983, Mel Brooks released his wartime comedy To Be or Not to Be, which was a remake of a 1942 film of the same name. Bette Midler and Shelley Long starred in the 1987 adventure comedy Outrageous Fortune. And finally, the 1991 movie Star Trek VI was subtitled The Undiscovered Country. The more times you read Hamlet, the more questions you will have. For example, how does Ophelia drown in a brook? I did extensive research and I found that when talking about bodies of water, it's easy to get confused between a brook, a creek, a stream, and a river. But across the board, a brook is described as the smallest natural flowing waterway often found in the countryside. It's usually shallow and can be easily crossed on foot. And what adjective do we most commonly associate with a brook? That would be babbling. And what makes it babble? Well, that would be stones and rocks. The reality is it's virtually impossible to drown in a brook because it's just mostly water running between rocks. All one needs to do to preserve one's life is to stand up. And even if you were mad, anyone close enough to hear Ophelia chanting snatches of old tunes would have no difficulty in running over and lifting her out of the water. Had Shakespeare chosen a different waterway, such as a river, a stream, or even a creek, this wouldn't have been a question, but we know how carefully he chooses his words, and Gertrude uses the word brook twice on 2 different occasions when describing her death. Another question, why doesn't Hamlet just inherit the throne in the first place? He was the rightful heir to succeed his father. He's 30 years old. We know that Henry VI was only 9 months old when he became King of England. He should have just put on his big boy pants and stood up for himself. Also, if the ghost is in purgatory and must stay there until he's purged of all his earthly sins, why does he urge his son to revenge his death? Wouldn't that just add more sins on his soul? Not to mention cause Hamlet to be damned for committing murder. Of course, he doesn't tell Hamlet to kill Claudius, just to revenge him. So since Hamlet was the heir apparent, why didn't he just expose Claudius for being a murderer and bring him to justice since he already had the love of the common people? If they backed Laertes when his father Polonius was killed, wouldn't they have also backed Hamlet if he told him that his father, the king, was killed by Claudius? Another question for you. Why doesn't Hamlet kill Claudius in Act 3, Scene 4, when he was in the confessional? As a Roman Catholic, I can tell you, even if you sit in a confessional and confess your sins, you need to have a confessor, a priest who can give you absolution for your sins, like murdering your brother. Otherwise, you're going to hell. Hamlet might have still gone to hell for killing Claudius, but he would have been able to spare the lives of Polonius, Ophelia, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, Gertrude and Laertes. And finally, when Hamlet is dying at the end, why didn't he ask a priest to give him absolution so that his soul would not go to hell for the murders he committed? Certainly there would have been a priest at court if there was a confessional at court and everyone had turned out to see the fencing contest. Well, it's questions like these that keep us examining Shakespeare's work for answers 400 years later and speculating when we don't find them. When we return, we'll look at some of the marvelous actors in the 1980 BBC Shakespeare version of Hamlet, as well as the 1996 Kenneth Branagh version. Now let's take a look at some of the actors who played in the 1980 BBC Shakespeare version of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. Derek Jacobi, who plays Hamlet, also played Richard II in 1979, Chorus in Kenneth Branagh's 1989 version of Henry V, and Claudius in Kenneth Branagh's 1996 version of Hamlet. Claire Bloom, who plays Gertrude, also played Catherine of Aragon in Henry VIII in 1979, the Queen in Cymbeline opposite Helen Mirren in 1982, and Lady Constance in The Life and Death of King John in 1984. Patrick Allen, who plays the Ghost, also played King Simonides in Pericles, Prince of Tyre in 1984. Terence McGinty, who played Lucianus, also played the second gentleman in Othello, Servilius in Timon of Athens, and the first gentleman in All's Well That Ends Well, all in 1981. Ian Charleston, who plays Fortinbras, also played Octavius Caesar in Antony and Cleopatra, and Bertram in All's Well That Ends Well, both in 1981. Tim Wilton, who played the first gravedigger in Hamlet, also played Fluellen in Henry V in 1979. Peter Benson, who plays the second gravedigger, played King Henry VI in Henry VI Parts 1, 2, 3, and Richard III, all in 1983, as well as the clown's assistant in The Winter's Tale. John Sterland, who plays Cornelius, also played Marullus in Julius Caesar in 1979. Peter Gale, who plays Osric, also played the Prince of Aragon in The Merchant of Venice in 1980. Reginald Jessup, who plays a messenger, also played the second Volscian senator in Coriolanus in 1984. Michael Poole, who plays the priest, also played Cardinal Campeius in Henry VIII in 1979. David Henry, who plays the English ambassador, also played a plebeian and a soldier in Julius Caesar in 1979. And finally, Patrick Stewart, who plays Claudius, also starred in Star Trek The Next Generation as Captain Jean-Luc Picard from 1987 to 1994. By the way, even though he was playing Hamlet's uncle and Derek Jacobi was playing Hamlet, Patrick Stewart is in fact 2 years younger than Derek Jacobi. Now let's also look at the all-star cast of actors who appear in the 1996 Kenneth Branagh full-length version of Hamlet. Kenneth Branagh directs the film and plays Prince Hamlet. Derek Jacobi, who played Hamlet in the 1980 BBC version, returns to play Claudius in this one. Gertrude is played by Julie Christie from Dr. Zhivago. Jack Lemmon plays Marcellus. The gorgeous and talented Kate Winslet, who starred in Titanic, plays Ophelia. Robin Williams plays Osric. Billy Crystal plays the first gravedigger. Charlton Heston plays the first player. Dame Judi Dench plays Hecuba. Sir John Gielgud appears as Priam at age 93. Lord Richard Attenborough from Jurassic Park plays the ambassador from England. Brian Blessed plays the ghost of Hamlet. Richard Briers plays Polonius. John Spencer Churchill, the Duke of Marlborough at the time, played Fortinbras's captain. By the way, the outside images of Elsinore were filmed at Blenheim Palace in Oxfordshire, England, at the actual home of the Duke of Marlborough and the birthplace of Winston Churchill. And finally, the youngest player in the acting troupe was played by 11-year-old Perdita Weeks, who went on to co-star 22 years later in the 2018 television series reboot of Magnum P.I. And now get ready for today's trivia challenge, which is called Shakespearean-Based Musicals. All right, now it's time for today's trivia challenge, which is called Shakespearean-Based Musicals. Identify the Shakespeare play on which the following musicals were based. Number 1, The Lion King. Number 2, West Side Story. And number 3, Kiss Me, Kate. When we get back, I'll have the answers for you, along with some relevant lessons to take away from Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. Okay, let's see how you did on today's trivia challenge, which was called Shakespearean-Based Musicals. You were to identify the Shakespeare play on which the following musicals were based. Number 1, The Lion King. Believe it or not, it's Hamlet. Number 2, West Side Story. That's based on Romeo and Juliet. And number 3, Kiss Me, Kate. That is based on The Taming of the Shrew. Now, let's take a look at some relevant lessons from Hamlet before we wrap up. First, it's important to understand the difference between justice and revenge. They're two different things. It says in the Bible, "Revenge is mine, saith the Lord." Resentment is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. Hamlet could have gotten the commoners behind him, like they got behind Laertes, and perhaps even England and Norway, to remove Claudius from the throne and expose him as a murderer. But he wasn't looking for justice, only revenge. Not only would he have become king, but he would have prevented his own soul from going to hell for his unnecessary murders. Next, think before you act. Hamlet gets a bad rap for continually delaying taking action against Claudius. However, the ghost never tells him to kill anyone. Certainly, if Hamlet's father is already in purgatory, why would he want to send his own son to hell by telling him to commit a murder? And what would happen to Hamlet's father's soul, which already had to be cleansed, if he added inciting someone to murder to his time in purgatory? Could he ever even go to heaven after doing that? Well, the answer is no. After all, it's just a play. But the point is, Hamlet procrastinates for 4 acts before acting. By all means, think through your decisions, but don't forget to execute them. In general, a good plan executed immediately is far superior to an excellent plan delayed indefinitely. And finally, neither a lender nor a borrower be. Yes, I know Polonius was an old fool, but he did get this right. It's far better for you to give somebody money and not expect to get anything back than to resent the person and lose the friendship along with the money. I'm Dave Romeo, and thank you for watching this episode of Romeo and Shakespeare. Please join me next time when a lying Italian villain with an evil brain comes between a separated married couple and causes them much unnecessary pain.